When they first asked me to come, and I said they want me to cover themes in the pastorals, I thought, really, in 2 lectures or 2 talks? I spent 14 years of my life writing this silly book. And so we'll do the first half today, and this is my commentary, and Zonovan's been so generous. They brought 5 or 6 to give away, so whoever asks the most penetrating questions will get a new doorstop. All right. What I decided to do is one of my pet things that I work on is the whole issue of leadership in the church. And so I wanted to look at 1 Timothy 3 this evening and talk about leadership issues. And then tomorrow morning is quite a bit more theological. We're going to talk about the relationship of justification and sanctification, becoming a Christian and being a Christian. In Jesus' metaphor, it's the gate and the path, and what's the relationship between those two. But tonight, I want to talk about the whole issue of leadership in the pastorals and how it can inform our church. Okay? I'm sorry, I'm just so used to preaching. I need to pray, and we can get started. Father, tonight as we look at these things, may we learn, but more than that, Father, may these truths in your word cause us to think through our own situations, our own churches, our own priorities in our churches. May we ask ourselves if we are truly training up the next generation of biblical leaders. In Jesus' name, amen. Yeah, when I left Gordon Conwell, I did a church plant in Spokane, so it's kind of went from an extremely academic setting to a really nerve-wracking experience in planning a church. So anyway. Someone once said to me that sitting in a garage doesn't make you a car or a mechanic. And I think about that relative to the whole leadership situation in the church. Because just because you are in the garage doesn't make you the car. Just because you have the role of senior pastor doesn't mean you really are a biblical pastor. And just because you perhaps were in a leadership role as an elder doesn't really qualify you to be an elder. I think we've probably all heard stories of arrogant senior pastors who disqualified themselves. We've all heard stories of incompetent leaders. One of the things that has hurt the most as I've talked to younger people as they've gone through difficult church experiences, and they basically said, thinking of their pastors and their leaders in their church, they said, if that's what a Christian is, I don't want anything to do with it. So this whole issue of biblical leadership is a critically important leadership, and I believe that we are at a real crisis in the American church as to what leadership really is. And we got through the worship wars, one way or another, and I think right now we're in the leadership wars, trying to decide what is a biblical leader in the church. And I think part of the problem is the lack of biblical and practical preparation, of both biblical and practical education for both the pastor and for the elders, people helping to run the church. You know, we used to, 30, 40 years ago, talk about seminary education as theological education. And the mantra of the theological education controlled the choice of the faculty, it controlled the choice of the curriculum, the distribution of the classes and whatnot. And then, I don't know, it was 20 or 30 years ago, some marketer got the great idea of saying seminary is about ministry preparation. The only problem is they forgot to tell the faculty. They forgot to tell the curriculum people. And I remember when I was a faculty member at Gordon Conwell, just scratching my head and saying, we fill kids' heads with knowledge and then we tell them to go lead people. And I thought how ill-prepared my students are for real biblical ministry. And then when I left Gordon Conwell and planted a church, I learned out how incompetent I was and unprepared I was to biblically lead people. The statistics are alarming. Within 10 years of graduation, 9 out of 10 seminary graduates are no longer in ministry. Think about that for a second. Within 10 years, 9 out of 10, this is on average across the board in the United States, 9 out of 10 seminary graduates are no longer in ministry. My brother-in-law is a dentist, graduate from the University of Michigan. And I said, hey, Terry. We call him Big Terry because my sister's named Terry, so you have to distinguish him. So, Big Terry, what would happen in the University of Michigan if 9 out of 10 of your dental graduates were no longer in dentistry within 10 years? He just laughed. He goes, University of Michigan would have been shut down a long time ago. This is a real issue, and I'm speaking as someone that had a wonderful seminary education, who enjoyed teaching in seminary, and yet have seen firsthand and through my students how ill-prepared they were to really be a pastoral leader. And what's alarming to me, and I know nothing about, you're all seminary, so I'm not talking about you guys. One of the alarming trends that I'm seeing in leadership preparation is this idea of, hey, all you need is 3 months. It's easy. It's convenient. We'll come to you. And you can be ready to go be a herald of the king. Because that's what your pastor is. I can't see. Where's... that's what a pastor is. Well, I think that's what elders are. They're heralds of the king. And just as the heralds of old had 2 responsibilities, that is to have a clear voice and a faithful message as to what the king told them to say, so also our leaders are to be faithful to the king and speak his word with a clear voice. That's not an easy thing to do. It's not, is it? I have a really good friend who's involved in a ministry, happens to be in China. And for some reason, they're still letting him over there. China has clamped down so much on this, but his focus is on character. And he has this wonderful ability to help mold the future leaders of the Chinese church in terms of their character. He loves football. He teaches them to play football. He takes them way out of Shanghai, mostly up in the mountains, and they go trekking, and it's all character development. I go, this is great. But do they have anything to say on Sunday morning when they stand up? And the answer is no. They're great people with nothing to say. So we're in this kind of mess, I think, in education and in biblical preparation. And one of the practical applications I'm going to make at the end of this talk is that I really believe that it's the church's responsibility to raise up the next generation of leaders. I think the church has to accept the responsibility because only the church can do it. Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary cannot prepare you for biblical ministry, as good as an academic institution as it is. The mix that HBU is working with here, I'm going to learn about because it's interesting to me. Gordon Conwell is a fantastic school that prepares people for half of what they know for biblical leadership. This is the kind of problem that we're in. Okay, enough about that. We're going to look at 1 Timothy 3. We're going to look at some of the requirements to be an elder, to be a deacon, and I'm going to pull in from 1 Timothy 5 and Titus 1, because I want you to leave here with a conviction that we need to really investigate what is it going to take for Second Baptist, for HBU, for whoever your church is, to really raise up the next generation of leaders, which, by the way, is not my phrase. I'm pirating something John Piper said, but that he'll be okay with that. Before we get into the actual requirements of 1 Timothy 3, though, I need to quickly discuss something that's pretty theoretical if we're going to understand what Paul is telling Timothy. And that is, for so many years, commentaries on the pastorals treated 1 and 2 Timothy and Titus as if they weren't in a real historical situation. They were just kind of this general manual on how you run a church. Now, we don't do that with Romans. We know that Paul wrote a letter to the Roman church. We know that there were issues in the church. We know it's a Gentile-Jewish divide, Romans 14 and 15. And that gives you the context to understand the whole book of Romans. It's just a natural way we interpret the Bible, right? We put it into its historical context, except the pastorals. And for decades, the pastorals were studied independent of any historical situation until good old Gordon Fee came along. And Gordon argued that the pastorals are ad hoc. In other words, they're addressing a specific problem in Ephesus. And you have to understand the historical situation if you're going to understand, among other things, the requirements for leaders. And so, for example, there's this requirement in all three lists of church leaders that they not be drunkards. Why? Because the false teachers were drunkards. In every list, there's a requirement that the church leader be faithful to his spouse. Why? Because the false teachers in Ephesus were sleeping with the young widows. So the whole discussion of leadership is done against the backdrop of what is happening in Ephesus. Here's why this is so important. If you take a look at all the requirements for leadership in 1 Timothy 3, if you think it's a checklist, you're going to get in all kinds of trouble. Has to be faithful in marriage, so all single people can't be leaders in the church. Has to have faithful children, plural. So someone that's single or doesn't have children or only has one child can't be a leader in the church. Oh, bye, Paul. Bye, Timothy. If you view the lists as checklists, first of all, they'd all be the same. But you get these real problems that how are you going to apply them? And I think the answer is to recognize that Paul is sitting there writing to Timothy, and he's thinking about all the troubles in Ephesus, and he's saying, this is the type of person. He's not giving us a checklist. He's telling you this is the type of person who should be in leadership. Is he married? Well, then he has to have proven faithfulness to his spouse. Well, the kind of person that's faithful to his spouse is also the kind of person who is faithful in dating relationships, in relationships with other people. It's that same kind of person. So single people, you're not off the hook. Well, I'm not married, so the faithfulness clause doesn't apply to me. Yes, it does. Because we're talking about the kind of person that can be in leadership. One of the requirements of a leader is that if he has children, he has to have proven himself an effective manager of his children. The home is the microcosm for the church. And if you've proven your ability to lead people at home, then that shows that you probably have the ability to lead people in the church. Or what if you don't have children? Well, what I'm going to say is the policy is, do you know how to manage people, not things, people? And if someone was being considered to be in leadership here at Second, do you go by Second Baptist, Second Houston? What's the short version? Second. Just Second? I don't know if I'd want to be called Second. I'm sorry. I'm going to say Second Baptist. I'm sorry. I'm a little too competitive to be going by the name Second. Anyway, what was that? Earth was I talking about? Oh, yeah. If you have children, you have to have shown that you were a skilled manager of people, someone who wants to be considered for leadership in Second Baptist, and they don't have children. Second Baptist has the responsibility to see what is their managerial ability with people. So that's why I'm saying this whole issue of the nature of the list is so important. They're not checklists, but what they are is they're saying this is the kind of person. And one of the interesting questions is you look at the requirement for elders in the first part of 1 Timothy 3 and the requirements for deacon in the second half of 1 Timothy 3. Guess what? They're all the same, except for one thing. How come? Because Paul is concerned about the kind of person, the type of person who is in leadership. And it doesn't matter whether you are an elder or a deacon, you still have to be the same kind of person. Okay? Make sense? All right. Well, let's start. Open your Bibles. 1 Timothy 3. Let's look at verse 1. Since I'm on the NIV translation committee, I will be reading from the NIV. It's kind of one of those things you have to do. But it's okay. I like it. Paul starts off, here is a trustworthy saying. Whoever aspires to be an overseer, elder, desires a noble task. Let me just stop right there. It's not the desire that's noble. It's the office that's noble. Okay? The position of leadership is a noble position. It's an honorable position. You know, when I was pastoring, there would be people that just felt a little too anxious to be in leadership. See, it was they really wanted to aspire. And well, it's a good thing. No, the office is a good thing. The desire isn't necessarily a good thing. I remember this one guy. He couldn't get anyone to nominate him, and he tried literally for years, from one church to the next, trying to get someone to nominate him to leadership. He was overly enthusiastic about himself. He nominated himself every single year for 15 years. And then finally he got in leadership. It wasn't a good choice. Some people, though, are just so hesitant. Oh, no, I don't want to be an elder. And sometimes that's wise, because maybe they understand what it really is to be a leader in a church, and they're going, I don't know if I'm gifted, ready for that. I don't know if this is the right time in my life for it. But the point I'm trying to make is that the position of a leader is a good thing. Some churches have this issue where they actually think that a church is a democracy. Church isn't a democracy. Church has leaders. It has leadership structures. The leaders are told in the Bible to lead well, and the people are told to obey, do what they're told, and to do it without their creating problems. But the church is not obviously I'm not a Congregationalist. Their church has a leadership structure, and it's a good thing. And again, all of us, I'm sure, have had bad experiences of one kind or another. That doesn't mean it's not a good thing. Leadership is a good thing. But you look at this and you go, I wonder why he had to say this. I wonder why Paul felt the need to say, Timothy, it's a good thing. Leadership is a good thing. It's a noble thing. And I started thinking, well, there's probably all kinds of reasons that people need to be encouraged that leadership is a good thing. It's hard work. Leadership, if you do it biblically, is really, really, really hard. It'll bring you into conflict with other leaders. It'll bring you into conflict with people. It is a difficult task to do well. In fact, I think it takes years for someone to really be properly prepared to be a leader in the church. Because after all, Titus 1:9, you have to be able to teach the truth, you have to be committed to the truth, and you have to be able to refute error. I remember hearing someone trying to get someone else to apply to be an elder at my church. And they said, oh, it's easy. Just meet once a month, make a couple decisions. Oh, really? You think that's what it is to be a leader in the church? Okay, Craig's sitting down here right front. So Craig gets up and he says, well, you know, we don't have any original manuscripts of the Bible. We don't have any copies of the originals. We don't have any copies of the copies of the originals. We don't have any copies of the copies of the copies of the copies of the originals. The Greek manuscripts that are behind our Bible are so hopelessly corrupt, you can't possibly trust a word in your Bible. Now, Craig doesn't say that. He argues against that. What are you going to do? A leader has to be able to refute error. Guess what's going around today in the church? Bart Ehrman misquoting Jesus, the unreliability of the Bible. Now, who wants to sign up for a class on textual criticism? Oh, come on, textual criticism is fun. Oh, okay, well, you're probably smarter than I am. It is hard work. Perhaps you've had a bad experience, hurt by an elder, hurt by a pastor. I'm from the southwestern part of Washington State. We get the overflow of all the health and wealth crud. That's a theological term. From the Bethel Church in Reading, the Health and Wealth Church, God wants you to flourish. I will accept no doctrine of sovereignty of God that allows for suffering in people's lives. Oh, yeah, God's a really itty-bitty little God. If you don't think God's in control even over our suffering. I mean, are you ready for this kind of stuff? Are your leaders ready for this kind of stuff? It's hard work. And what makes it even worse is in Ephesus. Remember Acts 20, Paul's at the end of his third missionary journey. He stops off at Miletus, the port city. The Ephesian elders come down. What does he prophesy? Fierce wolves from among your own midst will come and will destroy this church if possible. So even Paul knew that trouble was coming. And the question is, were the elders ready? Yeah, leadership is not a simple task. It's a very, very difficult task. And if you're like me, if conflict is hard for you, then it becomes really, really difficult. All right. He needed to say it was a good thing. So then he continues. Whoever aspires to be an overseer desires a noble task. Now, the overseer, and I'm not real crazy about the NIV translation at this point, and we will see if I can get it changed, but it won't say. I'm going to change the NIV. The overseer must be above reproach. The NIV is right. It says, now the overseer is to be. But it's quite an emphatic construction. Greek nerds, it's de. It is necessary. It is a non-negotiable, period, that an elder must be above reproach. This is the overall qualification for an elder. I've tried in both. I was on the ESV committee too. And in both the ESV and the NIV, I try to put a quote after that, a colon. Is to be above reproach, colon. Here's how you be above reproach. I lost both votes, and there's just nothing you can do about it. But that's what's going on here. It's you are to be above reproach. You know what? I skipped something. Let me go back. Well, do I need to? Let me go back. I'm sorry. If you look at these qualifications, there's three basic categories. There's character, competency, and responsibilities. Character, competencies, and responsibilities. The first and foremost and most important, at least according to Paul, because it has the most discussion of it, is a person's character. Number one quality for church leadership is a person's character. He is to be above reproach. Okay, now I'm back on track. This is his chief concern. And in fact, if you look at all the lists, they all start with the same basic message. A church leader must be above reproach. In other words, it's an issue of character. This is what seminary cannot teach. It just can't. I know in some seminaries there are now character clauses in the contracts that you go to seminary. Do you guys have one? Do you have a? You don't know? Do you guys? I'm looking for. No, thank you. You need to get one. You need to get one because some people will go through seminary and they are not very nice people. They don't meet this qualification. And I won't tell you stories, but it's true. Anyway, character, competencies, responsibilities. The number one character is above reproach. It's an issue of character. Notice that it doesn't say he has to be perfect. It doesn't have to be flawless. It also, though, doesn't have to say that the church leader will someday be above reproach. It says, right now, if you're going to consider someone for leadership in the church, that person must be above reproach. I had a very disturbing but interesting experience. We did this church plan. It grew pretty quickly. There wasn't a lot of churches in northern Spokane preaching the gospel, so people were hungry to hear the gospel. We merged with a dying church that happened to have a building. We thought, usually you split churches, right? We thought, hey, whatever, let's see if we can put them together. It actually worked pretty well. But in the process of getting to know each other, I had the elders take a 2-day retreat. And what we did was that we said, what is going to be our guideline for leadership? What are the things that we're going to look for in future leaders? How are we going to train future leaders? What are going to be the qualifications that they have to meet? I mean, it's the biblical qualifications, but some of these are really open to question, to debate about what they mean. And just what will our future leadership look like? We spent 2 days, and I collected all the verses about leadership and whatnot, and we went through and made all our interpretive decisions, and it was a really good experience. At the end of the 2 days, Don, who is a good friend of mine, is one of the elders from the other church, but I got to know him pretty well. Don said, I just think we're being legalistic. Really? Yeah, 2 days, laying down a bunch of rules, they were just being legalistic. I said, well, how would you choose an elder? Just good people that can make decisions. Really? So when Paul says an elder must be, boom, 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 you just think that's legalistic, and we just have to choose nice guys. This is of critical importance at a very practical level in the church. Now, a church the size of Second Baptist and some of the other churches I know that you represent are of such size that you're going to be able to find qualified leaders. Smaller churches, it's much harder to find qualified leaders. But Paul is very, very clear to Timothy, must be. No options for allowing unqualified people into leadership in the church. In fact, one of the most frightening passages, frankly, in the past was 1 Timothy 5, and he's talking about how do you handle charges brought against an elder, and he goes through a set of rules, and then he says in verse 24, the sins of some, in leadership he's talking about, the sins of some are obvious, reaching the place of judgment ahead of them. In other words, some people you can look at and go, no, that person is not qualified for leadership. That's obvious. And then he says, but the sins of others trail behind them. In other words, if you appoint someone an elder, appoint someone in leadership too quickly, and you haven't really done your due diligence, you haven't vetted them, you may find that there's skeletons in the closet. And then he flips it over and he says, in the same way, good deeds are obvious, and even those that are not obvious cannot remain hidden. So the point is, take your time, but look then up at verse 22. Do not be hasty in the laying on of hands. Do not share in the sins of others. He's telling Timothy, slow down. Look at the leaders. Look at your future leaders. Let time for the skeletons to come out of the closet. Let time for the good deeds to become obvious. Because if you appoint, this is interpretive, if you appoint the wrong people, the leadership in their church, you share in their sins. There, does that scare you? Should terrify you. That if you want and you vote for and you politic or you try to get, or whatever be the case, someone into leadership too quickly that proves to be unqualified, to some extent you share in the responsibility for that. If you knew my story, you'd know why this verse bothers me so much, because this is what happened to me. And I can point my finger at them and you shouldn't be this way. But I was the one that didn't slow the process down. I'm the one that didn't do the proper vetting, and I share in some of the things that they did. So Paul's just saying, we have to have people in leadership that are above reproach, and we have to take our time, and we have to let the story unfold itself to make sure that we have the right people. My opinion, I told people when I left Gordon Conwell, I'm going to preach the word and love people. If you hear anyone say that, you know they're naive, because that's not what church leadership is all about. Your pastor should want to preach the word. Your pastor should want to love the people. But I really, truly believe that if you are not involved in leadership development as a pastor, you will fail. The whole process of identifying and preparing and nurturing the leaders in your church is so difficult to do that you have to be deliberate at it. And I think that's what a pastor's job is to preach the word and to love the people and to be directly, deliberately involved in raising up the next generation of people. Do you know the name Gene Getz? Wrote Measure of a Man, million seller, 27 languages kind of stuff. It's a good book. And he goes through 1 Timothy 3 and just does a practical application. And I got to meet with him a while back, and I was talking to him about the structure of his church. He's the guy who started the Fellowship Church series, a lot of them, thousands of people. And I said, what is the structure? Because I knew he had changed his mind between the first and second edition of The Measure of a Man. And he said, I believe that a pastor's responsibility is to nurture the leadership, and the leadership's responsibility is to nurture the church. It's not the pastor's job to mow the lawn, clean up the kitchen, visit every single person, be available for 24 hours a day. Ephesians 4, that's your job. That's not his job. But you got Jesus, the apostles, and the church. That's a pretty good pattern, don't you think? Jesus, okay, one of my favorite stories, and I embellish it a little, but it's the book, The Lost Art of Discipleship, or The Lost Art of Disciple Making, done by one of the guys that was at the beginning of Navigators. Jesus is up in heaven, and an angel says, hey, Jesus, where you been? Haven't seen you for a while. I've been gone 32, 33 years, been on earth. Oh, really? What have you been doing down there? This is the made-up part. And he goes, oh, I healed thousands of people. I preached to tens of thousands of people. I spent most of my people with 12 guys. The angel said, why'd you do that? Jesus said, they're the hope of the world. The angel says, what's your plan B? Jesus says, there is no plan B. Those 12 are the hope of the world. That is the structure I think that we need to look at in our churches, where people are caring for the number of people that they're able to, who then care for other groups within them. I don't know of any other way to implement the teachings of 1 Timothy 3 without that kind of structure. Okay, now that's my interpretation. It's not biblical fact, but I don't know how else to handle this information. A little parenthetical there. So, it's a noble task. The leadership of the church has to be above reproach. And there's two in particular that I want to look at. Most of it's pretty straightforward, but there's two in particular I wanted to emphasize, mostly because at least one of them is a real source of debate. Look at the end of verse 2. Okay, well, I'll read the whole thing. The overseer is above reproach, faithful to his wife. Oh, that's what I want to talk about. This is the NIV. Faithful to his wife. It's a controversial interpretation. It's a very, very difficult passage to understand. Paul, for some reason, uses a phrase that doesn't exist anywhere else in Greek literature. And I mean nowhere else in Greek literature. We have the Perseus Project can search all known Greek literature, and you put in the phrase that Paul uses, you won't find it. And it's a one-woman man, is word for word what Paul says. In order to be above reproach, number one, the elder has to be a one-woman man. You could also translate it one-wife husband. Well, what on earth does that mean? I just want to know why he used such an odd phrase. But what on earth does that mean? It's at the head of the list. This qualification is in all the lists for church leaders. Well, three obvious facts. One, marital fidelity is incredibly important. Repeated at the head of the list. The emphasis is on the word one. In Greek, when you want to emphasize a word, you push it forward in word order. So it's a one-woman man, a one-wife husband. Okay, so all the emphasis is on that one, or a lot of the emphasis. And it doesn't say not divorced. I mean, I get into this discussion a lot. Can a divorced person be an elder? No. Can you show me where the Bible says that? Yeah, 1 Timothy 3:2. Where's the word divorced? It's not there. What on earth is a one-woman man? Well, 5 basic positions. Let me go through them quickly. This is the teacher side of me, so just endure it. Number 1, some people think it means that the person has to be married. A one-wife husband. Certainly it's a position at the Eastern Orthodox Church. The problem is that Paul and Timothy then could not be an elder in the Ephesian church, and it goes against Paul's preference for singleness in ministry. So outside of the Eastern church, not many people have gone with this interpretation. Interpretation number 2 is the prohibition against polygamy. If you have Wayne Grudem's fantastic systematic theology, this is the position he takes. So one woman at a time is the idea. No polygamy. And I was shocked to find out that polygamy was common in Judaism. The Romans actually had a law against polygamy unless you're a Jew. And then you were allowed to have more than one wife. So that's one of the interpretations. The problem is that in order to be, 1 Timothy 5, in order to be a widow who's accepted, who's being cared for by the church, Paul uses the same phrase in reverse, that you have to be a one-man woman, a one-husband wife. And there is no evidence for polygamy in the church, and there is no evidence anywhere for polyandry. Is that what it is? One wife having multiple husbands? Is that polyandry? Yeah, okay. It's nice to have a resource sitting here. As long as he keeps nodding yes, I'm just really happy with this. There's no evidence for polyandry in the ancient church, so most people don't go with the polygamy. Number 3, are you nodding off? Yeah, okay. Number 3, I put Craig Evans to sleep. Yeah. Sorry to single you out. Number 3, some people think that this phrase, one woman man, the later I get, the sillier it is, so just excuse me. Third interpretation is it means you can only be married once. I believe this is John Piper's position. It's the NRSV's position, how they translate it, married only once. And the interesting thing here is that you really can't make this decision based on 1 Timothy 3:2. People have to go to their view of marriage, divorce, and remarriage and what they believe in general about that. And then that's what gets brought into this passage. But that's just the way it is. So position 3 is married only once. Position 4 is a variation of that, and that is that it would allow for a person whose first marriage ended in death. This is Romans 7. Death breaks the bond. It would allow the person to be an elder again. This is why the old NIV, the 1984 edition, said the husband of but one wife. Again, it was emphasizing it was just this one marriage unless it would end, that it end in death. Which, by the way, is the interpretation of the early church. The early church wanted leadership. Are you serious? Okay. The final interpretation is faithfulness. This is where most people are going. It's the NIV, the NLT, that Paul is calling for faithfulness in marriage. Here's the thing. You can't say, thus saith the Lord, on this interpretation. But as a church, you're going to have to make up your mind. And that's why I believe in what I call an elder position paper. It's not a position of what everyone has to believe, but you in a church need to understand, are you going to allow divorced people? Are you going to allow people whose first marriage ended in death? Are you going to allow someone whose first marriage ended in a divorce? Where are you going to draw the line for the leadership in your church? And I encourage you, if my personal website, if you go to billmounce.com/publications, if you scroll to the bottom is my elder position paper, and you can take the data from that and do what you want with it. But I just really encourage you when it comes to that you have to make an interpretive decision for your church. Where are we going to go with this? I encourage you to make it based on the Bible. Number 2, after character, the second one is competencies. There are certain competencies the leadership has to have. The thing that separates an elder from a deacon is the last phrase in verse 2. He must be an apt teacher, must be able to teach. The elders had the primary responsibility of teaching. They were the preachers. They were the preaching elders, we would maybe call them today. That is what set an elder apart from a deacon. And you're going to have to, and if you go to, I think it's Titus 1:9, you get the best definition of what it means to be an apt teacher. It means you have to be able to be devoted to the truth, so there has to be an emotional commitment to it. You have to know the truth, able to teach it, and you have to be able to refute error. This is one of the things that must characterize the leadership in our church. Now, where are you going to go to get all this great training? Well, do I have a website for you? Mine. 20 years ago, I started a ministry called biblicaltraining.org. Encourage you to go to it. Our mission is to get the best teachers. That's where I was headed with you, by the way, at dinner. To go get our best teachers to record classes so I can give them away for free. We have 2,100 hours of instruction, 132 classes and seminars. They make great small group curriculum. Everything from new believers to what you need to know about Islam to Greg Beale on biblical theology. It's a very, very wide range of classes. And this is why I stopped doing everything else I've been doing and focused on this, because our leaders need to be apt teachers. And most of them can't quit their jobs, move to Boston, go $60,000 in debt to learn the Bible. The average debt of a seminarian, is $60,000. Well, that was 10 years ago. It's probably higher now. $60,000. Unless, Greg's his name here, right? Unless you're Greg and a pastor of a church this size, you're not going to pay off a $60,000 debt. Not at a normal church. So, encourage you to go to biblicaltraining.org. Anything you want to know is there. So we have character, we have the ability, the competencies to teach, and I also mentioned they have to be managers of people. They have to manage their home. They have to manage their people. Their children. They have to manage their families, not things. The church is not led by people that know how to run a factory. The church is to be led by people who know how to manage people. And you look at their family, you look at the relationship with their spouse, you look at the relationship with their kids. If you're not married, if you don't have a family, you find another way to look. How does this person relate to other people? And if he's in a managerial position, then that will let you know whether the person is qualified. And by the way, the only way to know what a person really is like is to give them power. It's the only way you're ever going to know what someone's really like. Does a person have the courage to do the right thing at the right time and the right way, or do they cave in? The only way you're going to find that is the 7-Minute Manager, right? You know the book, Business People? It's to give them a little bit of authority, a little bit of power. Watch how they deal with it. So the competencies are able to teach, proven management. Let me conclude, since I have 2 fingers left. This is hard, you all. This is really, really hard to do. It's not something that you can do casually in a church. It's something that you have to have a deliberate leadership training culture. Because if you don't have it, it won't happen. One of the things, I always got in trouble when I was pastoring. One of the things that got me in trouble is that I wouldn't go to meetings at night. And they got really angry at me. I go, I have 3 teenage kids. 3 teenage children. And one of them has way too much testosterone. You think I'm going to leave and talk about the kitchen when I could be playing basketball with my son? I don't take meetings at night. It's hard. You go into conflict, but you have to do what you feel that you have to do. And I really believe that your leadership's primary job is preach the word, love the people, develop your leadership structure, then let that leadership structure love the church. I don't know of any other structure that works. Second of all, a church needs to understand the doctrine of ecclesiology. Ecclesiology is just a fancy word for what is the doctrine of the church. Ephesians 4, that God has given apostles and preachers and teachers, evangelists. Why? To train the church to do the work of the ministry. And if you don't have that kind of biblical structure, And instead, most of the people want to sit back in the church and be consumers and pay the religious guys up front to be the religious ones. It'll never work. They need to understand ecclesiology. They need to understand their role in the church. And again, that's very difficult. I'll close with this story. I had a board member that recently died, went to this church, named Forrest Henson. Anyone know Forrest? Okay. Forrest is a great guy. He was a very good, he loved this church. I mean, he deeply, deeply loved Second Baptist. Forrest was very wealthy. But when the hurricane hit, guess who was here every single day, pants rolled up, shirt rolled up, working. His best friend was a man he met under the bridges in Yoral's outreach ministry. He loved Michael. He cared for Michael. He took care of him. He got him a wheelchair. He made him part of his life. Forrest was the church. He was doing things that Greg couldn't possibly do. There's 30,000 people here? Whatever it is at Second Baptist. I'm sorry, I'm in First Baptist, aren't I? I am so confused. Greg is First Baptist. Forrest loved First Baptist. That's right, this is Ed Young, Second Baptist, Forrest. Well, you know, I've never made a mistake speaking before in my life, so I guess it was doomed to happen. Anyway, Forrest loved First Baptist. He loved the pastor, and he understood that it was his role to go under the, even with his wealth, it was his responsibility to go under the bridges and to do outreach to the people that needed it the most. That's the kind of church that we need. A trained leadership structure and the church involved. That's the message of 1 Timothy 3. And now I'll go home and repent for my lack of memory. Thank you.